Welcome back to our next question and answer session with Father Stephen. That's myself. And as I mentioned last time, I will be answering the second half of the question that we had in our last session. So I'm going to reread the entire question just in case you may have missed it. And the two parts are really interconnected. So it's really one big question, but it's rather a long answer. So I thought it's good to separate the two. Hello, Father Stephen. In episode 20, you mentioned that young people think they are invincible. I agree they sometimes do, as well as want to cram in as much of information and experiences for their future jobs, life, etc. When death and evil ghost spirits are present to them, they take them lightly and even try to indulge in experiencing ghosts through haunted places, while others are greatly troubled by them. And they refuse to acknowledge that death is part of life and there are evil spirits in the world and we should not go looking for them. In my experience, when talking to fellow young people, there is a sense that their current behaviors and inclinations are part of who they are and they cannot change. So I have a couple of questions. How can young people, teens, college, university students, and young professionals explain to their peers that indulging to experience haunted places is a bad thing? In other words, going to railway tracks or cliffs where someone passed away and looking for ways to encounter ghosts. That was part one. Why does the church make people follow their rules and ideas and not look at science or society cultures or update the way they speak and the music they sing at church? Why are churches and priests seem more scary to be in than going to a cemetery or a haunted place? Seriously, someone asked me that. I thought they were joking, but they were not. They mentioned they would rather sit in a cemetery all night than a church, which I thought was weird, but they were serious. Thank you, Father Stephen and Roberto. So yes, this is a rather old question also. Roberto is no longer with us, so I had answered part one, and now we're on to part two of this question. So why does the church make people follow their rules and ideas and not look at science or society cultures to update the way they speak and the music they sing at church? So it's kind of like, why is the church stuck in the Middle Ages? Why is the church so behind the times? Why is the church not accepting of modern day trends? This is what the person is really saying. Well, first of all, I want to point out that I wish we could make people follow our rules, but we cannot. I preach on the same things over and over and over again, and people still keep doing those things they're not supposed to be doing. So we cannot make them follow our rules. We encourage them to follow our rules. The other thing is that they are not our rules. These rules are not made up by the men of the church. These rules are given to us by God. They have been revealed to us. And the reality is that the church does not merely look at what God has revealed or what is contained in the Bible. The church does look at science. In fact, the church, the Catholic Church, is very, very scientific. We view science as one of the ways in which God reveals truth to us. So God is the author of the rules of the universe, so the rules that apply to science and physics and all these different things. So we believe that science is one of the ways in which God reveals truth to us. And in fact, when I studied for the priesthood, or when anyone studies for the priesthood, one of the things that we have to study is philosophy. Now, literally, philosophy means love of wisdom, but philosophy is a science. It's a science about how to think rationally. It's a science about the meaning of life and the different views or theories that different people, especially scientists, have had regarding the meaning of life, the purpose of our existence, apart from God. So the science of philosophy incorporates all branches of science and looks at all branches of science. So even when we studied philosophy, I was exposed to some scientific things. I don't want to get into too much detail about that. But the reality is that the church very much supports scientific studies, and there have been many individuals in the church who were scientists, who made advancements in science. And the other reality is that there are many, many well-known scientists who were believers in God. Einstein is just one of those individuals. But various priests, sometimes they will specialize in a particular science, because as priests, we don't just serve in parishes. Many priests, they teach. So there are preaching orders. They teach in universities, and sometimes a priest will specialize in a particular science. So, for example, the individual who came up with the theory of the Big Bang for the universe, that the universe started off as a big bang, a big explosion, was a priest by the name of Demeter. And since then, Einstein's theory of relativity has been verified, which hinges on the Big Bang theory. And since even the time of Einstein, there's been so many things that have verified the Big Bang theory. So all the evidence right now, from a scientific perspective, is pointing to the fact that the universe began out of nothing. Okay, that's Demeter. The father of genetics is Gregor Mendel, and he was an Augustinian monk. So he was a Catholic monk. I can't remember if he was a priest, but he was a monk. He lived in a monastery, but he studied science, and he's called the founding father of genetics because of his genetics discoveries in the field of genetics. So it just goes to show that people in the church are very scientific, at least in the Catholic Church. Part of the reason sometimes Catholics think that the church is not open to science or even opposed to science is because of the media. So the media paints a false picture and sometimes portrays people of faith as being superstitious and not accepting scientific fact. And this is wrong. So, sometimes they give analogies. When there was thunder and lightning, people would say God is angry. Well, no, Catholics didn't tend to do that. Now, sometimes, mothers might say things like that to their children, and so people get these funny ideas. But one of the big issues was in regards to Galileo. And the media, which is opposed to Catholicism in general, or in particular, but they like to point out that the church opposed Galileo and that because of that, the church was anti-science. And they paint a very false picture. So I would encourage you to do some real studies on Galileo and to read perspectives from both sides. I had gone to the Science Center some years ago, and they had a special video in the Cinesphere on the sun. And they talked about Galileo, and they implied that the church tortured Galileo, which was total nonsense. So the church never tortured Galileo. So in fact, the Pope had sponsored Galileo and was in some ways funding him because the church was always interested in newer models for figuring out the calendar. So they had different models of how the stars move, and so the years are kind of based, the months and stuff, the cycles of the moon, all these things. So they looked at the stars for these things, and they wanted to figure out how the stars move and to have a perfect model for these things. So the church was always interested in these things. Now note that Galileo was not the first person to introduce the idea that the earth revolves around the sun. Copernicus, prior to Galileo, had done that. Not that much prior to Galileo. So there was nothing wrong either with Copernicus' theory or with Galileo's theory. That was not the issue. The issue was that people weren't sure. And for Galileo to put forward this idea, which is okay, but he used some proofs, and those proofs were scientifically faulty. So the scientists of the day, who also happened to be churchmen, said, well, we can't accept these arguments. And Galileo kind of kept pushing his ideas. So, for example, if we're looking at the solar system from above, okay, so the sun would be in the center, and let's say the earth is revolving around the sun, but the earth also revolves around its own axis in this way. So if you use vector math, so the earth is going in this direction with an arrow going around the sun, but it's also revolving. So on the top there's an arrow, and on the bottom there's an arrow this way. And if you add up the vector math, it would appear that the earth is actually speeding up here and slowing down here. But that's only vector math. But in reality, that doesn't happen. So Galileo said that the reason there are tides is because the earth is speeding up and slowing down as it rotates. That's total nonsense. Scientists knew that the tidal waves are caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. So scientists just said, Galileo, we can't accept this. Okay. So in other words, if the Earth were in the center, you wouldn't have those tidal waves caused by. Okay. So anyways, Galileo was wrong about that. The other theory that Galileo used was the sunspots. And he said, well, if the sun is here and the sunspot is here and the Earth is here revolving around the sun, because the Earth is on a tilted angle, the position of the sunspot will change when the Earth is on this side of the sun. And that's very true. But it makes no difference whether the sun is here and the Earth is revolving around the sun, or the sun revolving around the Earth, you would get the same effect. So the church said, well, we can't accept that argument. Not the church, the scientists in the church. And the problem was that Galileo just kept pushing his stuff, and he wrote something that kind of criticized the Pope because the Pope stopped supporting him, and that's what led to conflict. So was he treated badly? Yes. He was placed under house arrest in a palace, but he was not tortured. And the church was not opposed to science. The church was not opposed to the fact that the Earth revolves around the sun. So there was no problem. The problem was really science. The problem was that the church was too scientific, and Galileo was using poor science, poor logic. But the media wants to portray it differently, which is very, very unfortunate. Today, what's interesting is that top-notch scientists are promoting intelligent design theory based on their scientific discoveries. And one of these, in one of these fields, in the field of biology, evolutionary scientists, top-notch evolutionary scientists came together, and based on their findings, they're saying not evolution, but intelligent design. So was there some development of species? Sure, but it's designed by God. It happens according to God's plan. So there is a movie, a video that you can probably get on YouTube. It's called Unlocking the Mystery of Life, and it talks about this fact. It's very, very interesting. So scientific. So once again, the church supports science. Why am I aware of all these things? Because I support science, because I am aware of science. The science that you are taught in most universities is very low level. I'm talking about top-notch scientists. So low-level university scientists, they're teaching old science, but top-notch scientists, they're saying no to evolutionary theory. They're saying no to, just Big Bang out of nothing. These apologists, these atheists who want to argue against the church, they're asked, well, what caused the Big Bang? And one said, well, mathematical formulas caused the Big Bang. Another one said, nothing caused the Big Bang. And everybody just laughed. How can nothing cause the Big Bang? So, theories about expanding universe and contracting universe, that's been proved to be false. In fact, our universe continues to expand, and in fact, it's expanding at an increasing rate. And what they're saying is it will never contract, never. So this is what science is saying. So we support science. All right. In regards to this question, I think the person is really asking about morality. So it's kind of like the person points out that, well, maybe in the past everybody agreed, for example, that premarital sex was wrong and the church taught that it was okay, but now we live in a different age. Everybody's engaged in premarital sex. Nobody thinks there's anything wrong with it, so why is the church still stuck in its old ways? So the reality is that human nature does not change, and there's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible tells us. So there were societies in the past that were very corrupt. During the time of the Roman Empire, premarital sex was happening all the time. Extramarital affairs were happening all the time. It was kind of like our society. Homosexuality was very prevalent at that time also. And what happened to that society? It became more and more corrupt and eventually collapsed, which is what tends to happen when societies become morally corrupt. So it's not as if it's something new, but the point I'm trying to make is that human nature does not change. God is the one who creates our soul. Our soul does not evolve. So what is wrong is always wrong, even if everyone is doing it, and right is right, even if no one is doing it. And that's a statement by St. Augustine. And when it comes to proclaiming the truths that we proclaim, as I mentioned earlier, we proclaim these truths not just because God has revealed it, not just because the Bible says so, but we use empirical evidence to support what we say. In other words, we can use the natural law, we can use natural arguments that are rational, that are acceptable to everyone. So for example, when it comes to premarital sex, well, it leads to multiple partners, it makes it harder to stay faithful even after marriage. So you're more inclined to infidelity, which will lead to greater divorce or more cases of divorce, which means that children from broken marriages will be more damaged psychologically as well. So you're going to have more children with psychological problems in the world, which is definitely happening today. There will be more and more unwanted pregnancies, which will lead to abortions, and women will be detrimentally affected by having abortion psychologically and sometimes even physically. Some may even die. There will be more cases of sexually transmitted infections or diseases. There will be more cases of sexual abuse, rape, etc. It will lead to younger and younger people becoming sexually active, which we see happening. It leads to more abuse of children. So if children are becoming more sexually active and adults, recognize this and see it, they're going to be more likely to abuse children. So children will be more sexualized. Society in general will be more sexualized. There will be more sex on primetime TV. Pornography will appeal more to people. It will be more readily available and used to make a lot of money. And there will be more explicit sex education in the schools. We see this happening. So if society embraces a sexual kind of lifestyle or sexual norms, these are just some of the effects. These are just some. There's more. There's a lot more. I'm just mentioning a few of them. All right, let's move on to music in the church. Why has it not been updated? Well, in many ways it has been updated. So in other words, we don't sing the oldies that we used to sing. Some churches they do, and I think that's okay. But when I was young, there were different classifications of music, and I'm just going to go through some of them. Heavy metal, rock, soft rock, punk rock, country and western, classical, jazz, blues, and we can go on and on. There's many classifications of music, and different people, different kinds of music appeal to them for many reasons. Sometimes it's what their friends listen to, sometimes it's what they were growing up with, sometimes it's what their parents listened to. And sometimes music has an ability to speak to your soul, and you can relate with what the singer is singing about. But my point is that different people have different tastes and different preferences, but it's also true that certain types of music are more appropriate for certain settings than other types of music are. So for example, you may not have noticed this, and I bet you haven't noticed it. When you watch a movie, now I'm not talking about fast action movies, fast-paced action movies, but if you watch a movie that's kind of like a drama, there's always classical music being played in the background, and you don't even notice it. And this music has this ability to draw out certain emotions within you, whether it's feelings of love or suspense or danger. Music has this ability. Pay attention next time you watch a movie, what kind of music they're playing in the background. Now, yes, different types of movies will have different types of music, but in general, classical music is very much played in music. And most of the time you're just so focused on following the events of the movie that you don't notice the music that's being played in the background. So my point is that this classical type of music is very appropriate for movies because of the ability of the music to draw out certain emotions or to, a sense of danger or expectation or whatever it may be. And the same applies to church music. So the question needs to be asked, well, what is the purpose of church music? So in other words, when it comes to church music, the ideal of church music is that it's supposed to enhance our religious experience. So should church music just be entertaining? Should church music just be something that makes us feel good? The answer is no. Church music is something that should elevate our soul and make it so that it's conducive for us to be able to pray and to feel that our souls are being elevated. So if we were to ask the question, well, what does the church recommend in regards to music? Well, the church has always recommended Gregorian chant. Not always, but since the time of St. Gregory the Great, who kind of popularized Gregorian chant. And there's simple Gregorian chant, which most people can sing, but there's also like polyphony, which is very beautiful. It's glorious. So it's usually Latin and it's chanted, and there's organ music in the background. Personally, I would say that the kind of music I like is music that we can sing along with, but music that is expressive of our faith, and music that is catchy. So something that you can keep and kind of repeat to yourself. Because music is one of the ways in which we express our faith, but music is also one of the ways in which we learn our faith. So I remember when I was young, there was this song, and it's kind of a modern song, or at least it was when I was growing up. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. And it was kind of catchy, and it kind of stuck with me, right? So even to this day, I remember it. So it's kind of a reminder. They'll know we are Christians by our love. It's a reminder to love. So, here, especially at St. Aidan's, we have different types of music. So, for example, at the 5 p.m., I would describe it as kind of Caribbean music. It kind of repeats itself, which is good. It's religious themed, religious based, but I find it a little bit hard to sing to, and I find it's kind of like not my kind of music for church. I think it's sung very beautifully. I think it's done very well. At the 10:30 Mass, we used to have the youth choir, and I would say that it was kind of like a band. They had a bass guitar, I think, and it's very much like modern music, but they were singing religious hymns or phrases, but once again, I would find it difficult to sing along with. So my favorites, I would say, were the 9 a.m. Mass and the 12 noon Mass, which is music that is more capable of being sung, that I could sing along with. Okay, so this is also why I like the idea of singing from a hymn book, or even if it's displayed on the screen, it just makes it easier to sing along. I don't think the intention of the choir is to entertain. Often people clap after Mass, and it's really not a performance. The music is really there to enhance our prayer life, and ideally for us to sing along. In my opinion, that's the ideal. So, getting back to the question and kind of combining question, or the first part of the question with the second part of the question, why is it that churches and priests seem more scary to certain individuals than spending all night in a cemetery or a haunted place? So there may be different reasons, but I want to give you my understanding of why this is possibly the case. And this is just speculation on my part. And I want to give it to you from 3 different perspectives. So my answer. So from an intellectual perspective, from a psychological perspective, and from a spiritual perspective. So first of all, from an intellectual perspective, these individuals see the church as old-fashioned, unscientific, not up to date, hypocritical. They see a lot of corruption in the church. They see these men almost like the bishops sitting on a throne and just dictating and telling people what to do and what not to do. And meanwhile, they're committing all kinds of scandals and doing horrible things. So intellectually just doesn't appeal. And I understand that, but they have a misunderstanding of what the church is all about. In regards to psychological reasons, it's possible certain individuals may have had a bad experience with a priest or a religious-minded person, or just with going to church in general. But also, I think it's very true to say that what the church stands for, and often the lifestyle of those individuals, are not compatible. And because they're not compatible, you don't want to associate yourself with the church, because the church stands for something that you do not stand for, because you stand for the opposite. In other words, you might want to lead a sinful life, whereas the church is saying, no, you shouldn't do that. Here's an interesting fact which is related to music. Outside of 7-Eleven stores, they used to play classical music. This was when I was young. I don't believe they do it anymore. They used to play classical music outside of 7-Eleven stores. At any 7-Eleven store you went to, you would find them playing classical music. And people pondered, why is this happening? And the reason is because they realized that playing classical music keeps young people from hanging around the 7-Eleven stores. So this was a deterrent to get young people not to hang out. And it's true. There was actually a study done. I saw this on some program where there was a place where drug deals would take place. It was an ideal place for the drug pushers to meet and sell their drugs and exchange merchandise and whatever. So they decided to put a speaker there and to start playing classical music. And within about a month, the drug dealers stopped going there to do their drugs or to exchange their drugs. And I'm looking at this from a psychological perspective. So classical music is very ordered. Modern music is in many ways disordered, and there is an appeal to that. In modern music, there is a beat, that they say is similar to the heartbeat, poom, 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 or boom, 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 right? And it appeals to people, and it energizes people. But there's a lot of disorder in that loud music. And the reality is these people are leading disordered lives. So even classical music, because of its order, they find it is not in harmony with their viewpoint. So even subconsciously, they just don't like it. An interesting fact, they say, when you study, you shouldn't play music, but they say that when you're doing math, if you play classical music, it's actually makes it easier for you to do your math. It's actually easier for you to think logically about mathematical steps and things like that. Just an interesting fact. All right, so there are psychological reasons, and I think part of it is because these young people, their lives are very disordered, which is how they want it, okay? But the church represents order, just like classical music does. So that's the psychological reasons why they don't want to come to church. Reason number 3, which is perhaps the most important reason, the spiritual perspective. I remember somebody sent me a video about a Satanist, and he was challenged to select a consecrated host from a number of unconsecrated hosts. So let's say there were 10 hosts, 10 altar breads. One of them was a consecrated host stolen from a Catholic church. No matter how they mixed them up, every time he was able to select the consecrated host. And they asked him, how did you know which was the consecrated host? Now, Satanists want these consecrated hosts to desecrate them in their satanic rituals because they know it's Jesus. So they want to desecrate Jesus. They want to do horrible things to Jesus. They want to stab Jesus in the Eucharist. And his answer was that I felt intense hatred for that host. He felt intense hatred for that host. When a person is possessed, they hate priests. They hate the church. They hate anything that has to do with the church. They hate the mention of the saints. In fact, when a person is really possessed and you sprinkle them with holy water, the holy water burns them. They feel like they are being burned by holy water. In other words, they cannot stand anything that is holy. So, what is my point? Why is it that these young people hate the church? Well, there may be many reasons, intellectual reasons, psychological reasons, but there are probably some spiritual reasons also, especially if they've been spending time in haunted houses and exposing themselves out to ghosts and evil spirits. So in other words, the evil spirits already are controlling them, already influencing them, and ensuring that they hate prayer and that they hate the church and anything to do with the church. They want to keep these individuals from the church because they want to drag these individuals down into hell. Now think about it. Think about it. There's a difference between someone who might say, well, church is okay, but it's not my thing. I can spend an entire night in church, but I'm not going to do it because it's not my thing. There's a difference between a person like that and someone who says, I would hate that. I would rather do something that would endanger my life. I would hurt church so much. They can't stand it. there's obviously something that is wrong there. All the more reason why you, the young person who wrote this question, should make the effort to try to convince these young people of the reality of the spirit world, that there are evil spirits, and those evil spirits are intent on attacking each and every one of us and dragging our souls down to hell. May God help each one of us, and may God help all of you out there. May God bless you, and thank you so much for watching and supporting us.